Alright guys, how's it going? Oh, there's a lot of you here today. How's it going, guys? Can everybody hear me? Right, okay, should we get started? How's it going? So, hopefully everybody can see the screen. I've been a little bit nervous about giving this talk over the last few days. I've not been in the best health, but I was speaking to my pal Luca about it. She said, don't worry about it, just imagine everybody in the audience naked. I says, well, as long as they're not imagining me naked, that's the thing. So let's get cracking. That's me, I'm David. I manage Brodoclea Woodland Farm. In case you're wondering, that's me on the left. I also run the Woolly Pig Company, so I'm part of the Future Forest Company's agricultural team. And this really is just a bit of a story about my journey in agriculture and how I got to what we're doing now. And I've named today's talk after one of my dad's poems. And my dad took a bit of a similar trajectory in agriculture. My dad is Glasgow's poet laureate, and he sort of carries on that tradition of farmers in the west coast of Scotland that have used the sort of written word to kind of explain our circumstance. And he took a bit of a similar trajectory to my own, where he moved away from agriculture, but of course that gravitational pull pulled back in. So I was just going to read this poem to start with. As I drive, you dream on in the back seat, unaware that motorways have narrowed to lanes, safe in the guiltless sleep only children manage. My thoughts are with what is forgotten. Breeds and crosses have become cows and sheep in nursery books. Strains of rye grass are broad-brushed fields, greens and yellows merged at speeds. I want to learn again the art of careful detail. A wood pigeon's soft calling from the Scots pine on Hare Law, a fox in the skyline returning home, an early morning tractor ploughing for barley. I smell the damson above the diesel. I taste the earth. By the time we cross over the Locher Bridge, my feet on the pedals are paddling in frog spawn so easily it slips between the toes. Turning that final corner, I picture my welcome. The bark the collie gives a stranger, the slow burn of recognition in a wrinkled face, and my words, faltering and uncertain, like the first unsteady steps of an Ayrshire calf staggering towards her mother with a hunger newborn. Now, this is an important poem to me because my dad returned to the farm. I'm the child that's sleeping in the back seat. So he took me with him back to the farm. And the farm in question is High Auchensail. So it's a farm that's been in the family for longer than we have records of that kind of thing. And it was farmed by my grandfather, and now is farmed by my uncle. And it's a dairy farm. My mother also came from a dairy farming family. She farmed at Wellease Farm, and that's the painting of my mother's, of the farm that she grew up in. So I've got both my father and my mother's work here in the first slide. And growing up in farming is the best childhood. But really what I want you to do with this slide is draw attention to the two older men in the slide here. And these are my grandfathers, Robert and Archie. And it was really them that instilled in me a knowledge of the land, of our culture, a love for the land, a love for nature, biodiversity, and an understanding of sort of cultural earth science and these sorts of things. But the backdrop to farming at that time, even though I had a really lovely childhood and I had my sort of agricultural education, was of course this was a very turbulent time for the dairy industry, and it was really a sort of a case of sort of death by a million cuts, as it were. There was no sort of one thing, but of course it amounted to that kind of crash in 2015 where the farmers went out, and this was the first time I ever went out and protested, when we would go into the supermarkets and take all the milk down, and go outside and give it out to the people outside and show that we weren't getting any money for our milk. But really, my grandfathers, post-World War II, kind of were of that kind of mindset. If we go into dairy, and they were encouraged and they were urged, like, if we go into dairy, we're going to set our families up for generations to come on the land, and we're going to secure ourselves there. And of course, they were lied to. When the pressure came up in dairies and supermarkets, governments and communities, people abandoned the dairy industry to kind of its fate, and it had a huge impact in that little corner of Scotland. And as transitions go, this, of course, and what's relevant about this is, as transitions go, this was a very pushed, forced, and unpleasant transition. And now we're transitioning again in agriculture. And I think what's really important, I've got the Climate Justice Alliance's definition of a just transition up there for that very means, is that we're putting agricultural communities at the heart of transition. It's so great to come to conferences like that where this has really been put into practice. And if we don't get it right this time, then it could spell the end for a lot of the culture and a lot of the community that I grew up in. So it's very difficult to kind of describe the feeling at the time of how that is. And it's what inspired this poem here by my father, Leaking Bucket. The argument for an honest wage was lost. You could not face the once and for all, so sent down the farm's potholed track 3 of your cows each market day. A leaking away as though from a holed pail with its drip, drip, drip of milk to the ground. Cheaper than bottled water, more painful than a long prayer in blood. As if each small load of cattle was a shining white pebble dropped by you to follow back home in the moonlight. A fate path to a place no longer there. This picture is really important. It hung up from a newspaper and it was framed in the family home. And it was taken 50 years ago last year. And the farmers there are protesting the import of cheap produce into the UK, undercutting farmers' local produce. And fourth from the right there is my grandfather and his 2 brothers beside him. And it's always a reminder that there's a long history in agriculture with activism and standing up for yourselves, for your communities, for your countries, for the countryside. And I always think, when people say and they lay the blame on agriculture for so much nowadays, that if it wasn't for these rural communities all over the world that have been resistant to damaging practices and to systems that have, been harmful to us, then we'd be in a much worse position than we are right now. So for me, coming into my teens, unfortunately, we lost a whole generation very quickly of on the farm. During my grandparents' lifetimes, there's some stats there of the scale of the decline in the dairy industry. But what I think people don't kind of always get to know is the feeling of it, how it kind of looks like from the ground, Going to the agricultural shows every year, less and less people showing beasts there. All the young farmers I grew up with having to shoot off to Australia and New Zealand and Canada to keep going in farming. And for me, during this time, after 2015, my mum's side of the family gave up in the dairy. And last year, my dad's side had to as well, both transitioning to beef. So we've always had a family tradition of getting in together, all the cousins and uncles whoever to help out. Christmas Day, and there's always more work than needs to be to go around, you know. And that was the first Christmas we haven't milked cows on Christmas Day together. So by the time coming out of my teens, I was convinced there's no future in farming. So here's me scratching my head, thinking, what the heck am I going to do with my life now that I'm not going to be a farmer? And I had kind of limited options. I didn't do very well in school. I had, like a lot of farmers, I've got dyslexia, and it's actually it's up to 1 in 5. It's Dyslexia Scotland found, and it could be even greater than that. It's so great. There's so many such a sort of focus in this conference on neurodivergence in farming. So I didn't have a lot of options, but the one thing I gained from farming, sorry, 2 seconds, was the ability to graft like hell, you know. So I just took a whole heap of jobs, and my main job at the time, whilst doing all these other jobs, I worked crazy hours across a whole bunch of jobs, was a rural delivery driver with the Royal Mail, which at least got me, meant that I could go and see all the people that I'd grown up with every week, and I could stop off and chat and still interact with the community. And then, it wasn't really until I'd met my objective, which was to put down a mortgage for a home of my own when I was 23, where I actually sort of thought, right, what actually matters to me in my life? Took a bit of time to think about things. And at the time, it was during the sort of big refugee crisis, and everything was really kicking off in Syria. And of course, it's still ongoing. But I'd just bought a house, and this is the naivety maybe coming from me, coming from a sort of rural background, maybe a bit sheltered from this kind of thing. I thought, hey, I've got a spare room, and I could totally put up a refugee for a while. Of course, it's quite a naive kind of thing to think about. So instead, I started volunteering with Refugees Welcome, and through them, I met farmers that had to, leave their homes and their lives behind, and move because of conflict, but also because of climate change. And it's really funny because you meet farmers, no matter where you're in the world, the first thing you talk about is the weather, And that was the first time I'd really start to understand climate change. And I was like, God, that's going to be quite a challenge. But I had a very kind of farming reaction to finding out about climate change. I thought, right, better nip this in the bud before it becomes a problem. So I thought, right, classic, let's plant a whole bunch of trees. So I joined a whole bunch of conservation organisations and planted thousands and thousands of trees, and ended up working with EA Enterprises, and they were doing a really interesting project around saving Scottish aspens, and I'd really, I'd definitely check them out. That's our aspen clones there, and that's Peter at the top there. And Peter was like a mentor to me. He really took me under his wing and taught me a lot about woodland creation, a lot about what it means to manage woodlands, and then took me along to my very first Reforesting Scotland conference. Give us a wave, the Reforesting Scotland folk. They definitely get in touch with them, because fantastic group of people. And that was the first time in my life I'd ever heard about agroforestry, and I was like, right, this, to me, I love working in woodland, I love farming, this is what I want to do. So I started getting, I thought, right, how am I going to get this? So finding out as much as I could, University of YouTube, about regenerative agriculture, about agroforestry. And then I took on, I studied environmental science part-time at the Open University. And at the same time, I was kind of getting involved a little bit in kind of activists and environmental activism. There's me reading poetry in the main debating chamber of the Scottish Parliament. I wasn't really supposed to be there at the time, but they received it very well, and we achieved in getting a citizens' assembly on climate change for Scotland. Not that the Scottish government ever acted on it, but hey ho. But that sort of taught me a lot about lobbying and a lot about what democratic levers you have as an individual to sort of implement change, and that was really important. But what I found, within these environmental groups is they tell me a lot of things about farming that did not live up to my sort of lived experience. And I'd get into big heated debates and arguments all the time. So I needed to sort of also understand why this disconnect was there. And during lockdown, I'd been looking and I'd been applying for all sorts of jobs, but I didn't want to be a postman anymore. And during lockdown, I was just to get out of the house doing a lot of tree planting, contracting, and going all over the place. And one of the sites that we're contracted on was owned by this company that had an amazing tagline, so the Future Forest Company, unfucking the future. And I thought, I want to do a bit of that. There's for a site assistant role, and it said if you've got experience in agriculture, and I was like, I've got experience in agriculture, I can do that. So that's a bit of information there about the Future Forest Company. I applied, and it turns out, I didn't know this at the time, but a couple hundred other people had applied. There was a lot of people out of work at the time. I got into this, so I had an initial interview and then I had another interview, and I'd found out the person who was dropping the trees off to us every morning was the person who's going to be giving me the interview. So I insisted that I was going to meet the person to pick up the trees every morning. That's when I met Ken, who's the other half of the Woolly Pig Company. And Ken asked me a question that I think you should be asking anyone that you're going to be interviewing for a job, which is, how would you like to be interviewed? And I said, I want to come and work with you for a day on the farm. So we came and worked on the farm for a day, and we built a fence together and put the world to rights. And later that day I got a phone call and said, you want to take on Brodoclea? And I was like, absolutely. And that was that. That was my route into working on Brodoclea Woodland Farm. And here's a wee snapshot of Brodoclea Woodland Farm. Just at the height of summer with the pigs grazing under the trees. That's what a kind of typical pasture looks like on the farm. So let's just kind of go through a year on the farm. So we're way up high, 260 to 370 metres above sea level. Just under the community wind farm in Dalry in North Ayrshire. As you can see there, I don't know if you can quite make it out, but that's the shelter belts that protect the native broadleaf mixes. So we've got some productive mixes, and that protects it from the prevailing wind, because we're just over the hill from the coast. So we've got the Firth of Clyde in two directions on our farm. So we're really exposed, quite high up. And then through the summer, we've got a patchwork of a whole different range of sort of woodland pasture. With these, we're quite a long, thin, steep-sided site with these deep gullies that kind of go in between, and it's a really interesting sort of place to work. That's through autumn with all the colour coming into the leaves. And this is kind of the scene that I left when I left earlier on this week. Frosty, covered in snow, so we hit quite harsh winters at times as well as these amazing, you can't really make it out in the picture there, but these amazing cloud inversions and sunrises. So this is kind of what we took over, and surrounding us in our this is sort of a snapshot of the Scottish upland. I mean, Scotland's 70%, Scotland's landmass is 70% upland, and it's a bit of a snapshot of practice in this area. A lot of sheep farming, very hard work sheep farming, Sitka spruce sort of forestry, wind farms, shooting estates, and there's not a lot of diversity in practice kind of happening in these areas. And as you can see, the woodland had already been planted when we took it on and the pigs moved in. So it was kind of doing agroforestry a bit back to front, where instead of farming and planting the trees to assist you on the farm, we were taking on a woodland and trying to build a farming model that was going to fit in with that woodland. So when we're starting out, we obviously the Future Forest Company, we're kind of keen that we were breeding the pigs out, and they were doing this thing with enhanced weathering at the time, where they were spreading basalt, and we're going to capture carbon, spread basalt. The pigs were going to dig the basalt in, so it was a bit of an experiment, and they kind of wanted to expand it out. So they said, can we breed out more pigs so that we can send them on to the other sites? So it was more conservation grazing, but we very quickly kind of became aware that actually there's an opportunity here to create a really interesting agricultural model that could really benefit and protect this woodland over the long term, something that's going to be much more secure, give the woodland the financial security it needs to last. So we just sort of kind of put our case forward for doing that, and we were pushing against an open door kind of in a way with Jim, who owned the Future Forest Company, being a dairy farmer himself, and the only sort of thing that we kind of came up against was people at the time were thinking if we were producing meat, then maybe that would put people off investing in land restoration. So we had to sort of make the case for that as well. And so the Future Forest Company, and after taking a wee permaculture design course with Richard Perkins, and we kind of, the two of us came up with these sort of parameters to design the farm around. So we had to, enhance or not interfere with the woodland creation, carbon, biodiversity goals of the site. We had to be sort of low input and to become financially self-sufficient as quickly as possible. So that's, I'll just breeze through that because we're a bit stuck in time. And this is what we came up with. So, so we divided the woodland into 20 separate paddocks, so like woodland paddocks. And what we do is that we assign a grazing objective every time that we rotate a group of pigs into a paddock. And we've got the pigs in 5 different groupings depending on age and sex. So a typical grazing objective would be like 30 to 40% grazed, 30 to 40% mulched, the rest still standing, or at certain times of the year we want them to hit the bracken hard, or we want them to hit the wetland hard, so we'll maybe leave them on a bit longer. Sometimes the year it doesn't make sense to leave them on too long, and we might do a bit too much. So we're being adaptive all the time in how we're pulling together this system. And yeah, so we're there with them every day doing our what we call our dailies, but it's a very kind of low input and low startup business, as it were, because all the infrastructure we have for us on site is 2 shipping containers, and then we've got like a quad bike, a couple tools, and that's about it. So a couple livestock trailers, that's it. No buildings at all. So we had to put a lot of our infrastructure in ourselves with our fencing and our housing. We didn't have a budget to do, we didn't have any money to do it. So it just came up with having to create a lot of sort of creative solutions to working with that. And this is what we sort of ended up doing. So things like finding these offcuts. This was a company that was doing building big units and sheds. With what's that called? Stuff called? It's went out of my head. Sheet insulation. So they had all these offcuts sitting at the back of the factory, and we just went in one day and said, "Could we have those?" I said, "Take as many as you want." And we went, right. I don't think they expected us to take a lot of them, So that's what we've built all of our pig shelters out of. We milled larch that we felled on site to create all the fencing, and then we created a sort of supply chain, and the feed that we were using that was all going to, and butchers and whatever else, that was all very local, and hopefully sustainable as well. And within that kind of unit where the pigs are grazing in woodland, there's so much benefit to their health and well-being, and we did a big talk about that yesterday with the World Animal Protection Forum, just in the other room through there. And yeah, that was, they came up for a tour on site, and they said that we sit within the top 1% of both ethical and environmental practice in pig rearing in the UK, which is really, really great. But I don't feel like we've done a lot. We haven't worked hard to get that. We've just sort of put pigs in, we've just put pigs in as that sort of missing piece of the puzzle. So when it comes to Mangalitsas, the reason we went with Mangalitsas over a kind of a native breed of pig is that we really kind of looked into it. We looked at a whole bunch of different breeds of pig, but we've just found that Mangalitsa's really worked best in our context, which was, that we had, in upland, very exposed. We needed a really hardy pig that kept itself well. We could raise with minimal inputs. And Mangalitsa's really kind of also good-natured as well. So Mangalitsa's really kind of fit that bill. It's not just the wool that keeps them through the winter. It's this layer of fat that they have across their whole backs that really insulates them, and it means that even at this time of year when the snows are down, they're out there living life, living their best life. You go and you touch them behind their ear on a cold day, and that's you can warm your hands up doing it, because they just keep themselves so well in that kind of system, and they have a lot of really good natural interactions and behaviours with the ground, with the land itself, which we were really interested in. Okay, what am I doing for time? And of course, pigs being one of our only kind of domesticated keystone species, and they really do change a habitat up, and they control the dominant species in the forest floor, create opportunities for so many other species in doing so. And one of the big sort of impacts the pigs have had is controlling the bracken on site. We had huge amounts of bracken on site. Now, bracken is carcinogenic and it could be harmful to pigs but the thing is, the pigs aren't going to eat the plant itself. The pigs are only going to eat the rhizome. So they're digging under the ground to get to the rhizome, and they're turning that nitrogen-rich plant into the soil, and then that means that you come back just very quickly, and it turns into some of the best pasture on site for grazing, because that seed bank just gets awakened by this activity. I think to avoid bracken poison, the thing you don't want to do is just leave pigs in an area that is nothing but bracken. If there's nothing but bracken there, then they can't pick and choose when to eat it. Usually they only kind of go for it, I'd say early autumn through to kind of late spring as a time where they'll be digging for the bracken. It also saves, because bracken being managed by harmful pesticides nowadays, it's a big deal. And in doing this sort of rotation, of course, we're building soil, we're creating food for the soil ecosystem. We're improving the grazing on site. We've seen improvements in the grazing on site. And the pigs are also helping to spread seed and help different species move from parts of the site to other parts of the site, and off the back of the pigs, because the wool, it gets caught the wool, and the Mangalitsa's naturally shed their wool through the summer, so they leave these wee seed bombs everywhere, and then also through their gut. And that's reducing the competition for predation. So basically, what we have, the Mangalitsa's keeping the cover down, is less cover for the voles, and the voles can be really disastrous in woodland for getting young trees in succession coming through. And what we've found as a result of that is that we've now got like 3 breeding pairs of kestrels on site. We've got foxes, we've got stoats and weasels and barn owls and tawny owls, and all these things have came and managed to benefit from the voles. And it's not like we're eradicating the voles. We're far from eradicating the voles. There's no way you could eradicate voles, but population is under control, just by putting this little missing piece of the puzzle in. And with the wetland expansions, the pigs dig channels and scrapes and bodies of standing water around the wetlands, but all over the woodland. Great breeding grounds for invertebrates, of course, but also it's just channeling water into new areas, and that's helping the wetlands expand out. But the pigs graze in the wetlands, so I think if this was a system with beef or sheep or something like that, you'd be like, no, we don't want to expand the wetland out, surely. But with pigs, actually, it's really beneficial. And the Mangalitsas, because of their kind of history of the pig, they've always sort of been grazed on wetland, and wetland, they do really well in wetland. And of course, there's a whole bunch of benefits to creating these ecosystem services. And the thing that we are missing from our business model is how do we benefit from that, because there's no schemes, and we're having to farm completely unsubsidised and without any kind of funding or anything. We're having to cover ourselves because at the moment there's just no systems to interact with pigs in this kind of system. But phenomenal for biodiversity. So we surveyed one of our paddocks, and we found 127 different species below the tree line. So that's the buffet for the pigs. That's why the pigs are so happy, so healthy. That's why we are only, our inputs through the summer are 3% with our feed. And then it goes to about 20 to 30% in the winter. So our inputs are really, really low with the feed. And that's a huge part. And we're using, no soy or GMO feed with that. But with that diversity, of course, comes butterflies, insects, birds, everything, and we've really seen things kind of take off. And I think the most interesting one that I've observed is with the birds and the interaction between the pigs and the birds. The pigs creating breeding grounds for invertebrates, the birds coming and eating the invertebrates, the birds following behind the pigs as they move through, so they're eating everything. So, you always kind of go and you see the birds just sitting on the back of the pig like this, so the pig's down eating, and then the bird just swoops down so it could be the first down there. And then just through the snow, in the snowy days like today, the pigs are digging big trenches through the snow, and there's a big flock of birds following them because it's the only food for miles. So it's amazing, this sort of almost forgotten behaviour, because it would have been a long time since wild boar roamed this part of Scotland, so it's just not been forgotten. And you see there, half the birds on site in the initial surveys were red or yellow listed, so it's a big deal for biodiversity. But interestingly, and I don't know if you can make this out, we've seen 60% more diversity in species of birds in the area where the pigs were grazing compared to the areas where the pigs were not grazing. And there's just, it's just great to work in that kind of environment. There's a couple here. That's the shield bug in the bottom right. That was the first sighting of it, well, the first recorded sighting of it in North Ayrshire. And then is that dog violet there? That's the plant that Natural England gave the National Trust hundreds of thousands of pounds to get pigs to help expand the habitat for rare species of butterfly. And we've been doing it for free. So there you go. So the business side of things, so we sell online through our sort of e-commerce website, so the Woolly Pig Company, and we do a bit of direct sales to restaurants and farmers markets and all sorts of things. So we collect orders throughout the month. At the end of the month, we just send them all out, so we're not ever taking more pigs to slaughter than we need, and we do that every month. And the objective and then of course we're communicating with our customers through our Instagram and our Facebook. There might not be too much time for questions at the end, so if I miss anything, then do get in touch through the Instagram or the Facebook. I've got business cards at the end, and I've got at the back of there, and I've got leaflets as well, so you can you can that's them. They've been held up. So yeah, and then get in touch if we don't have time for questions. So the objective that we had to cover with the sales was to cover my wage on site, and also to cover all the cost of maintenance for the woodland, and the community infrastructure. And what I mean by community infrastructure, I'll get to that in just a second. Actually, we've got a slide on that. And in order to do that, we've got to sell 60 pigs through through these methods a year, and 20 weaners when we're breeding them out, and we're breeding and farrowing all outdoors, all on site in the natural way. Once a year as well, at the right time of year, so it's not twice a year. And then we've looked at other sorts of possible methods of income as well, and what's going to become a part more, as the woodland matures, the opportunity for regenerative forestry in that space is going to become a big thing as well. We've had the wood miser up, we've worked the mobile sawmill a few times, and creating a lot of our fencing, and we've sold quite a bit of our fencing as well, fence posts as well. But when that's coming about, how it's going to be an interesting kind of thing, trying to marry up the forestry and the agroforestry. Obviously, we can't be pulling big machines like the forwarder here through the woodland that came to fill the larch, but then can we make it productive? With the horse logging, we've had a horse logging tutorial on site as well. There's lighter machines and stuff nowadays, so that's going to be the sort of next adventure. But that's going to hopefully, we're only just sort of really getting started. We've got the pigs, that's looking good, that's working well. But what are the other options? Agritourism, activities, other cultivations, bringing other livestock in. Is there anything else that we can kind of integrate into that? Just building this picture out in the woodland. And that's kind of what we've also been doing with the sort of community aspects of what we have on the site. So we put in a lot of community access gates. We've purposely left areas or strips of areas where the pigs aren't grazing so that the community can pass through. They can walk, jog, cycle, and have access to this area. Access is something we're very passionate about in Scotland. We've worked with North Ayrshire Council in doing so. And aside from that, we've opened up the farm, and we do a lot of farm tours with the LWA, Young Farmers, Glasgow University, Garnet Community Campus, and others as well. We do a lot of tours. And then we work in partnership with lots of local organisations and volunteer groups and people that just anybody that wants to come into the woodland and use that space. And of course we've got Ken, who runs this forestry first aid and chainsaw train courses on site as well. So that's, and then we've got the arts part of it as well, which was pretty interesting, especially for the three words for forest, play. That was a sociology study about people that work in woodlands, and they came and interviewed us on the farm, and then they went away and somebody took the study and then made a play about it. So I went to watch someone play me, and it was very strange. The actress that played me was probably a better me than me, to be honest. So it was having this understanding that investors aren't in a woodland. If you're trying to create a system to support a woodland into the future, investors aren't just people that turn up with big stacks of cash or people that are buying pork. Anyone coming into the space, spending time there, their love and appreciation for the site, the local community's love and appreciation for the site is what's going to keep that woodland a woodland into the long term. And we've had a lot of media it's sort of captured the imagination a bit. People have really enjoyed our story. Hopefully you're enjoying it too. It's a bit rushed. This one's a bit kind of redacted for trying to get into 25 minutes. So we've had quite a bit of attention, and we won the Best Agroforestry Award, and that was pretty cool to win that award in quite a conventional farming space. And 500 farmers, seeing us on the stage and stuff. That was really cool. But definitely my personal highlight, and probably the recognition that mattered to me the most, was when George, who was the farmer before the trees came onto the site. He'd not been to the site since the trees were planted, and it broke his heart when the trees went in, but when he came back, his son brought him back. And, having his stamp of approval on what we were doing shows that we can communicate to folk that would have a right to be critical of us. That was my best day on site. It's like walking around with my granddad again. Does it all work? Yes, mostly. That's me being a fence post. But yeah, it needs the finances and stuff. So what needs to change to help that happen? Raising public awareness. The policy things needs to change. At the moment, we've got too many trees, and pigs aren't included in agroforestry grant schemes in Scotland, and we've got too many trees to qualify for the agroforestry grant scheme anyway. Too many trees to qualify for an agroforestry grant scheme is crazy to me. And then, of course, there's a lot of other things and research, and we've been struggling to get people to come to Ayrshire to actually look at what we're doing. That's our local MSP meeting the pigs. And that's pretty much me. So really kind of what I'm hoping you're taking away from this is that for any landowners in the room is, when you're giving young people a chance or people a chance to do something different, to try something new and maybe fail, maybe succeed on land, that's such an important thing to be doing. And you're not going to get more stories like this unless we keep giving people an opportunity to show what they can do. And for folk that are, taking up opportunities, that have had a bit of success, that, have managed to do something new and find ways to make it work, it's so important to communicate and to tell your story and to let people know and to sort of shout about it, because that's what opens the doors for more people to do so in the future. And this final poem is kind of about that. This is Field Holler. Today I stand in a field and shout. It's good to stand in a field and shout. To stand somewhere you can call your own. Somewhere you can find a place. Somewhere you can find a space. Somewhere you can call home and shout. Today, I stand up in my field and shout, and others will stand up in their fields and shout. I am not alone in wanting a place called home I can stand in and shout. I shout for some cannot hear. I shout for some will not listen. I stand up and shout because each voice is important. Each must be heard, each given a chance to stand up and shout in their own language, their own voice, their own field. Fence and hedge will not keep out forever those who do not want you to stand up and shout, only want you to sing their song, so will come in, take your shout and take your field. But I will not yield to them, but add each lost voice to my own. Today, in my small field, I stand up and shout. Thank you for listening. If you have one question? I could take one question, maybe. Okay. We've got maybe time for one question very quickly if anyone's really burning to ask something. Down the right here. Oh, yeah.
I was just wondering how the pigs impact the saplings and natural regen, so the interaction between small scrub and the woodland creation and that.
So if you're leaving the pigs on there for too long, obviously they're going to wreck the place, So if you're moving them in this sort of system, they're not really getting the time because they don't eat trees, They don't eat sap. Very rarely they ever leaf graze, we are seeing natural regeneration happening in the paddocks alongside the pigs.
Thank you very much, David.
No problem.